Factsverse presents Never refrigerate this food under any circumstance. If you always struggle to find room in your refrigerator, you might have a few things in there that don't need to be refrigerated. If you remove those items that don't belong in the fridge, maybe you'll have more room for other things that actually do belong in there. Here's a list of foods that don't belong in the fridge. Before we get into our list, help us out by clicking that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. According to science, you should never put your tomatoes in the refrigerator. When they get too cold, it affects the functionality of the genes that help them get fully ripened. Rather than keeping them in the fridge, leave them uncovered on the counter. Some people think keeping coffee in the refrigerator will help to keep it fresh, but that's a mistake. When the coffee beans or coffee grounds get cold, it creates moisture and it can dull the flavor and aroma of the coffee. If you want to keep your coffee fresh, just keep it at room temperature in a dark, airtight container. If you want to store your potatoes safely, keep them away from the refrigerator. Cold temperatures will turn starch into sugar at a faster rate, which is why you need to keep them out of that fridge. It's best to keep your uncooked potatoes in a dry, cool, dark environment. If you plan to eat your nuts within the next few months, you can keep them at room temperature. They'll stay fresh for quite a while. If you don't plan to eat them within the next few months, store them in the refrigerator or the freezer. They're not going to taste as flavorful as you'd like if you store them in the fridge, but they will stay fresh longer. Herbs. Never refrigerate them under any circumstance. Herbs are not easy to keep fresh, especially if you don't store them correctly. And a lot of people store their herbs in the refrigerator thinking that will help to keep them fresh, but that actually exposes them to too much moisture. It'll cause them to wilt and become slimy. It's best to wash and dry your herbs and then store them on the counter where they can be exposed to air. If you want to extend the shelf life of your onions by up to a month, don't keep them in the fridge. Onions are like potatoes, and the cold temperatures will convert the starch into sugar at a faster rate. So if you want to store your onions properly, keep them in a mesh bag in the kitchen cabinet. Ground spices should be stored in the kitchen cupboard or a spice rack. They can last a really long time that way, so long as you keep them at room temperature. Keeping them away from the heat, light, and moisture, that's the best way to ensure that they'll last. Honeydew melons and watermelons. Believe it or not, they taste better when they're stored at room temperature. Melons can decay in less than a week if they're stored at room temperature. It's best to leave them on the counter until you're ready to cut them up. Winter squashes should be kept on the counter rather than in the refrigerator. In the fridge, they'll be exposed to humidity, and that can cause them to deteriorate. Leaving your squash on the counter will help it last longer, and it'll taste better. If you keep garlic in your refrigerator, stop now! Refrigerated garlic bulbs can become moldy due to the excess moisture. They can also begin to sprout, which is a sure sign that you're not storing it correctly. It's best to keep your garlic in a mesh bag or a loosely woven basket on the countertop. You should be storing your oil in the pantry. It's best to store olive oil, canola oil, vegetable oil, and peanut oil in a cool, dry area. If you want to maximize the shelf life of the oil, keep it out of direct sunlight. If you bought a pumpkin to make a Halloween jack-o'-lantern, storage isn't really an issue. Despite the temperature outside, you gotta put it on the front steps. If you bought pumpkins to eat, however, it's best to keep them out of the refrigerator and in the pantry or the cupboard. These are controlled environments, and they'll keep your pumpkins fresh until you're ready to cook. Nutella. It is a delicious chocolate and hazelnut spread. It also has a very short shelf life. Most people think that they should store Nutella in the refrigerator to keep it fresh, but that's a mistake. The cold temperature will harden the Nutella, making it more difficult to spread. It's best to store it in a cool, dry place with the lid sealed tight. There is no need to keep peanut butter in the refrigerator. It's going to last for months right there in the pantry. Also, if you put your peanut butter in the refrigerator, just like Nutella, it's going to be really hard to spread. Apricots, peaches, and mangoes. Each of these fruits continue to ripen even after they're picked, so to ensure that they fully ripen, store them at room temperature, away from light and heat. The cold temperature in the refrigerator will change the taste and texture of these fruits, and they won't ripen well. Flour is a staple every baker should have in their home. Some people keep their flour in the refrigerator to extend the shelf life, but that's not necessary. Flour will last 6 to 9 months in an airtight container kept in a dark, cool cupboard. Refrigerators are designed to preserve the freshness of your food, but bread should never be stored there. The cold temperature in your fridge can cause the starches in the bread to recrystallize, causing it to become dry and stale. It's best to leave your bread on the counter or in a bread box if you have one. Unripe avocados take 4 or 5 days to ripen on the counter. If you put them in the refrigerator, it's going to take a lot longer for them to ripen. If you want to speed the process up a bit, put them in a brown paper bag with an apple or a banana. These fruits release ethylene, which is a natural plant hormone that can speed up the ripening process. Ketchup contains a high amount of vinegar, which can react poorly to the cold temperatures in your refrigerator, and that can have an effect on the taste and consistency. Storing your ketchup in the fridge, it'll cause it to become watery and runny. If you use ketchup often, keep it out of the fridge. You can store your apples in the refrigerator, but they're going to taste better if you store them in a cool area away from the sunlight. You can store apples on the counter for up to 2 weeks. If you're not planning to eat them right away, you can store them in the refrigerator for 3 or 4 weeks. Just because soy sauce can be refrigerated, it doesn't mean that it should be. Because it has such a high salt content, it can be kept at room temperature for up to 6 months. If you store it in the fridge, it'll change the taste too. If you don't open the can, you can keep canned tuna for months, even years. The tuna is in a liquid that keeps it saturated and that preserves it. It'll last a long time right there on the shelf in your cupboard. You don't have to keep that refrigerated. Now, if you do open the can and you don't need all of it, then it does need to go into the fridge. Bananas. They are delicate fruits. They bruise easily. If you expose your bananas to the cold temperature in your fridge, they're going to turn black and become bruised quickly. It's best to store bananas at room temperature. That'll help them to turn soft and yellow and ready to be eaten. Most people think they need to keep their pickles or cucumbers in the refrigerator to keep them fresh, but that's not true. Pickles are stored in vinegar, and that keeps them fresh without needing to be refrigerated. Cucumbers are sensitive to cold temperatures. They, too, stay fresher when stored at room temperature. Like many condiments, hot sauce has a high vinegar content, so that means it can sit out without spoiling. If you keep it in the cupboard, the color may change a bit over time, but it'll still taste the same. In the refrigerator, it'll lose some of that taste and some of that heat, which is why you bought it in the first place. Subscribe for more.